Hi everyone, please the vote Tano here. Please. The internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Fleet Foxes album, Sure. This is the newest studio album from indie folk outfit Fleet Foxes, their fourth full-length LP, Robin Pecknold and the gang keeping up the pace since coming back from their self-imposed hiatus with the 2017 record Crack Up, which was a surprisingly experimental release from them. Many of the songs and the detours packed within them were winding, abstract, but still held true to the wondrous, shimmering folk aesthetics that put Fleet Foxes on the map. I loved it, but was still left wondering after hearing it, where would the band go after this? Even deeper into the weeds, potentially? Actually, no. The approach on this new batch of tracks is surprisingly straightforward and on the nose. Now, given the title of this thing, I wouldn't exactly say the music here screams to me sand and waves. Maybe it's a bit too rustic in aesthetic for that, but Fleet Foxes does get as close to the beach as I think their sound will take them. So yes, in a way, Sure is a bit of a feel-good album, which, as terrible as this year has been, is kind of a hard swallow. This record is something I would have hoped to go into with a more positive and aspirational attitude. So with that being said, I do have my issues with the record. Thankfully, little to none of them have to do with its mood or attitude. Earlier in this review, I commented on this project not being as experimental as Crack Up, which is true in a sense, but that's not to say the band doesn't take any risks or try anything new here. For one, this new collection of tracks is much groovier than usual. Some really strong drum beats and bass lines on this one. Now, keep in mind, this album is not Fleet Foxes going disco or throwing three-part harmonies over 808s, but still, I am slightly stunned to hear that steady quarter note bass and strong downbeat on A Long Way Past the Past. It's like hearing Fleet Foxes do their usual thing, but trying to cheekily incorporate the slow, driving, dramatic groove of Hoobastank's The Reason. There's also the multi-phased, quiet Air and Joya, which features these linear drum beats that you can really get lost in, which eventually pick up these heavy, somewhat progressive, panoramic embellishments and fills in the second half. And I guess as long as I'm complaining about this track, it is a little cluttered instrumentally. There are these expansive lead melodies and glistening piano runs and twittering rhythm guitars, all of which feel a little disconnected and out of step with the beautiful, angelic, reverb-soaked vocal harmonies that get a little buried in the mix. Really seems like a square peg in a round hole type situation. Meanwhile, there are some suddenly funky bits of the song Can I Believe You, which in my opinion do contrast a bit awkwardly with the passages of very commercially viable indie folk, the kind of sound that Fleet Foxes used to be a breath of fresh air from in the 2000s. Be aware, I'm not trying to say that emphasizing more rhythm and groove never works out in the band's favor. Sometimes it does. It seems to gel enough with Robin's bright lead vocals and passionate chord progression on the track Maestranza. The busy hi-hats and snare on this track create a captivating little groove, which play very interestingly against these plucky acoustic rhythm guitars that just kind of skip over the beat, like Morse code. In many ways, this track reads as classic Fleet Foxes with a new punchy dynamic. Then we also have the track Young Man's Game, which I gotta say, the band is kind of rocking on this one. It's got a pace to it, but it's Fleet Foxes we're talking about, so they're rocking kind of politely with some gently buzzing bass and roughly strummed, clean electric guitars. Not only that, but there's something about Robin's vocal arrangements on the song that just catches a huge Beach Boys influence. And while Pecknold might be using some really flowery language in his lyrics, the preoccupation with the loss of youth as well as the sunny mix kind of seem like Wilson-esque tropes as well. And speaking of inspirations, we also have the track SUNBLIND, which is like an explanation in song of the record's emotional methodology and musical DNA. Robin muses about escaping to a remote place to find some serenity while reflecting on musical figures who have been inspirational to him: Berman, Buckley, Arthur Russell. They are mentioned among many others on this track, and there's such an ecstasy to it, it's hard not to get caught up. Such a versatile array of musical minds mentioned on this track too, and maybe that has something to do with the sonic variety of this LP. Now, as adventurous and as bright as many moments on Shore are, there are also plenty of rustic and aesthetically rural spots on the record too that will most likely play over very well with longtime fans. There is Jara, which again I predict hardcores will love, even though I personally found it to maybe be a bit too typical for Fleet Foxes at this point, outside of those bits of vocal synthesis that often color the background of the instrumental. But personally, I was stunned by the incredibly forlorn Featherweight. We get more chilly Brian Wilson-esque vocal harmonies on this one over a gray folk instrumental. It is painful emotionally to hear Robin singing in such a muted way, but it works. It's a great song, and I love the lyrics too. All of the metaphors having to do with being personally embattled or having an internal struggle. Then I'm Not My Season is one of the simplest, folkiest, and most poignant moments on the record. Instrumentally, there's not much to talk about here, as it's really just like a lot of very gently strummed acoustics, which spotlight Robin's voice nicely and just frame his lyrics very well about being there for someone else, being there to support someone else in a time of need, save them in a way. Meanwhile, passages of For a Week or Two have this thick, drony, hypnotic quality to them that I can't resist, especially with the birds chirping at the end. The whole thing sounds like the dawn of a new day. As we move into the final leg of the record, it's not perfect, but Fleet Foxes continue to keep things interesting. Going to the Sun Road features these unexpected horn embellishments and vaguely psychedelic harpsichords that are just kind of rolling over each other. The sudden instrumental and compositional changes on the song make it almost seem like a track that could have been on Crack Up, but maybe a bit too trippy and cluttered for a Fleet Foxes song. On top of that, once again, it is mega apparent just how much of a Brian Wilson kick that Robin Pecknold was on in the midst of writing and recording this record. The grandiose and tight instrumental presentation on Cradling Mother, Cradling Woman brings just another stunning moment on this album. The whole thing has a powerful helplessness blues vibe to it, but with a heavier sound. The orchestral arrangements, the bass, the drums, once again, it's like Fleet Foxes, like you know them, like you love them, but with a new, punchier, thicker, wider dynamic. Oh, and there's a Beach Boys a cappella sample on this one too. Nice touch. Now, this track does provide, in a way, a sonic and an emotional climax for the project, a storm, if you will, after which there is a calm with the title track, Shore. Robin is soulfully crooning on this one over some gentle pianos. Lyrically, he's bringing a lot of the themes of the record full circle, the inspirational figures, relying on others. Then he begins to reflect on the pain and the trauma and the emotional stress that drove him to this escapist attitude in the first place. The scattered and gorgeous crescendo of instrumentation toward the end of this track is pretty powerful too. And overall, I liked this record quite a bit. Did I love it? Is it my favorite Fleet Foxes LP? Not necessarily, but for me it was a mostly beautiful, emotionally nuanced little album that really runs the gamut. We have tracks where Fleet Foxes streamline their sound, break new ground, stumble on a few risks, and also remind me of what made them such a special band to begin with. Feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this one. Tran. Zishan, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Fleet Foxes, forever.